I don't have to tell you some of the things I'm about to tell you because it's evident to anybody and everyone. I'm going to tell you anyway. There is a lot of chaos going on in the world right now. There's a lot of immorality happening around the world right now. There's a lot of people proudly sinning in the world right now. There's a lot of foolishness happening in the world right now. And there is, obviously, because of these things, division in the world right now. What we see happening all throughout human history, but it's amplified now because we have 24-hour news channels and we have social media and we have all these other things. What we see happening in the world right now is people trying to remove God from the equation, from everyday life, and attempt to form their own standard for things like justice, their own standard for morality, their own standard for doing ethics, their own standard for what is and is not acceptable societal behavior. And so what happens when people try to remove God as that ultimate standard that decides all those things, we're reduced to chaos and absurdity. It really does boil down to these two options. There's even a book called this: Christ or Absurdity. That's your two options. Because this is what you're reduced to. First of all, I've talked about this with you before. When somebody comes to me and tells me they don't believe in God, or if they come to me and say, I'm an atheist, I simply do not believe them. And neither does the Word of God. Because the Word of God says that all men everywhere know the one true God that exists. What they do is they suppress that truth in their unrighteousness because they love their sin and do not want to give it up. So when somebody tells me, well, I don't really believe in God, I hold to evolution or whatever it is, it's simply not true. What they love is their sin, and they want to keep loving their sin, and they certainly don't want to be held to a God who is holy and just and righteous because of the sin they love. And so they'll convince themselves that God does not exist. But their conscience bears witness to His existence. His law has been written on their hearts, and they cannot shake the fact that they're an image bearer of the God they say does not exist. And so, they live in God's created universe as an image bearer of God, suppressing His truth throughout, a lot of them throughout their whole lives. And so that's why I say it's really God or absurdity. You can choose one. People are attempting to redefine certain things to mean whatever they want them to mean. Right? We hear about equality all the time. Equality is a good thing. It's a thing that I believe it's a biblical concept. But when the lost in dying try to redefine what equality means, you just get more injustice. People are trying to redefine what marriage is. They redefine marriage to me. There's a lady, I think in Paris, France, married to the Eiffel Tower. Not truly, but they call it a marriage. God defines what marriage is, not man. People are trying to convince themselves that there's an unlimited number of genders. You can identify as pretty much anything you want these days. God says, the Bible says He created them in His image, male and female, He created them. There's two options. You don't get to choose which one you want. God decides that. And so all the way back to the fall, we have the same thing happening today that was happening then. You have people that don't want God to set the standard for how they live their lives. They want to decide what's right. They want to decide what's wrong. All the way back to the garden. And so we continue. There are politicians and leaders and other people who argue that abortion, or let's just call it what it really is, the slaughter of babies with malice and forethought. It's murder. They're arguing that this can be happen anytime, any place, anywhere, for whatever reason. Some even argue that even beyond birth, if the mother does not want it, you should still be able to kill it. Matter of fact, I've done ministry at abortion mills, and they don't use the old argument, well, it's not a person, it's a clump of... They don't use that argument anymore, because they know biology and science has proven otherwise. What they say is, yeah, I know it's a baby, I should still be able to kill it. There is right now in this world a systematic attempt by millions to rid the earth of Christian principles and the biblical worldview. That's what's out there. And what's happening in our nation and other parts of the world right now is the inevitable outcome when people try to convince themselves that God does not exist. And they try to be God themselves. This is what we're reduced to. Chaos and absurdity. So this is what the church is up against. The enemies of God have clearly and boldly pronounced themselves as the enemies of God. And so now it is extremely important for those of us that have been called out of darkness, because let us not forget that we were once in this world. And if it weren't for the grace of God, I would be the depraved of the depraved. But we that have been called out of that darkness into His marvelous lights need to be united as God's people, because the world is already against us. We must be unified as we move forward. We must be united in our efforts to take the gospel beyond these walls. We must be united in prayer. We must be united in our voices being heard in this sinful and fallen world. And we must be united in our belief that God and His gospel does belong in the public square. We must be united in the reality that the law of God trumps the law of man. That's the church worldwide as a whole. We should all be united in those things. Here's some things we should also be united around here at Lake Athens Baptist Church. We're committed to always standing firm on the Word of God. If this addresses a certain issue or topic, then this is our ultimate standard on that issue or topic. We must be united here at LABC to never forfeit our biblical convictions, even when other churches waver or capitulate and give in to the demands of the culture. Because there's other churches that do that. We, frankly, are not allowed to be cowards. So let us march with boldness as the people of God. Now, that was just the introduction. Let's get into the passage.